E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā rau rangatira mai. Kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. Tēnā koutou, e ngā iwi Ngāti toa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. O te whaata alofa atu le pa ia ma le mamalu o au fia mai mo le nei wha moe moe. So I fua manuia I le nei au fia. A fio mai lau a fionga Mark Brown, the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands. A fio mai lau a fionga le sa'afa apito. A fionga fia me na omi mataafa. A fio mai lau a fionga Minister Mahuta, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, tēnā koe. Le a fio mai lau a fionga au pito sua William Sio, le Minister o Tangata Pasifika I Aotearoa, ma le sui Minister o le Foreign Affairs. A fio mai o ma lo ese o le Pasifika, whaapea foi ma lo ma ua mai le nei tae au manuia. A fio mai lau a fionga Chris Seed, pule a le MFAT, whapena foi pulenga ma le mamalu o le awhainga luenga o le MFAT. A fio o tupu matama alii, wale tua matausi, ma lo le whalau manuia. Ma lo ni, whakamalo atu kia te koutou uma. Ta alofa lava, kia rana, no uia, Māori, ma lo lelei, ta alofa, Nisa Bola Vinaka. Whakalofa lahi atu, warm Pacific greetings. Manuia te vaiaho o te ngangana tukelau. I acknowledge that it is Tokelauan Language Week this week, and I would like to share a proverb from our Tokelauan brothers and sisters. Tauwa ki to lumanaki nei, mataofi ki na manuia, mataofi ki na mea lele uma. Determine your future now by taking hold of working opportunities. Thank you to all the delegates of the SID 2021 conference who have joined us today to hear from the amazing lineup of Pacific experts for the Pacific panel. This panel features Pacific diaspora leaders and professionals, as well as a representative of the Pacific regional NGO sector. My name is Afamasaga Jackie Kari, and I will be the facilitator of this panel today. The theme of our panel discussion today is Reimagining Pacific Diaspora and Pacific Regional Organizations' roles in Pacific development in the post-COVID world. Some of the questions which were posed to our panel were, are Pacific diaspora already contributing to Pacific development? What is localization from a Pacific lens worldview? How can we break down the barriers and create partnerships between New Zealand aid charities delivering Pacific projects and Pacific NGOs and experts in Aotearoa and the region? First up, we have none other than Ray Allen, COO of Avengers. Ray was born in 1984 in Goroka, Papua New Guinea. He migrated to New Zealand in 1995 due to a volcanic eruption in Rabaul and PNG. He grew up in the Wairarapa, went on to play rugby for Manawatu Turbos and for the Waikato Mulus through 2007 to 2010. Ray is the Chief Operations Officer at Avengers, an EdTech business based in the Waikato that specializes in teaching learners of all ages how to build apps, websites, and computer games. Ray is on the board of the World Water Rams Charitable Trust, which uses ram pump technology to bring running water to remote communities in developing countries. I now hand it over to our first panelists to say a few words. Mr. Ray Allen, Pawhetai.
Kia ora, Jackie, and kia ora, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and being participating in this panel. As Jackie said, I'm Papua New Guinean born, born in Goroka, which is the highlands in Papua New Guinea, to a Papua New Guinean mother and a Kiwi father from the Wairapa. And as Jackie mentioned, a volcano sent me down here to New Zealand, which is an interesting thing to survive and to come through. And as Jackie mentioned, my role as the COO of Code Avengers, an edtech company that has an educational platform that teaches kids and learners of all ages how to computer program. So for myself, education and for my family has been really important. And so seeing the Code Avengers platform and how important that is, and being a Pacific Islander and how expensive it is actually to build a platform such as Code Avengers, it actually led me to want to share it with our Pacific whānau. And that's basically been our story, my story with the Pacifica, and trying to introduce Code Avengers to them. So Code Avengers is actually a commercial realization of a 4-year PhD study that found some really effective ways to teach children how to computer program. And from there, we've developed it into a business that we primarily sell to the United States and into Great Britain. But for me, being a Pacific Islander, I really wanted to share this with our communities, as I know education is key in becoming self-reliant and feeding yourself and feeding your whānau. So that's been a big key for me and wanting to engage with the Pacifica. So how I did that was convince my boss, number one, that hey, we need to focus in the Pacifica to truly help those that need help and need our platform. And that really came by essentially my role in the company is to look after the business operationally and make sure it runs smoothly, but genuinely because of wanting to share this platform with our Pacifica, I was able to convince my boss to let me engage. And it's been an interesting journey to be honest, in terms of localization and in terms of connecting with funders. It's been an interesting journey, but one thing that I've been really pleased with is that there's a natural way of doing business in the Pacifica, and that is, whanaungatanga, connecting and doing business, and it's been fantastic, to be honest, and especially COVID's actually done, and it's been mentioned earlier, but COVID's actually brought our organisation, especially to be able to put our trust and to put our IP essentially into those on the ground in the Pacific. And so that's been a challenge, but actually something that's been really awesome, so that we've built in-country capabilities. And through Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Pacific Corporation Foundation Charitable Trust, we've actually held a couple recent projects where we've taken our code camps. Code camps are coding workshops where we inspire kids, get kids pumped up about ICT and about technology. And we've been able to take that to Papua New Guinea, to 3 schools in Papua New Guinea, with a total of about 100 kids. And then also some students in Savai'i, where recently we just held a code camp or coding workshop there, where kids were able to interact with our platform and learn the basics and the foundations of computer programming, which is really important to us. That helps with building that digital divide and lifting digital literacy in country. So I'd say that the connections with the Pacific Connections team have been vital. Felicity Boland and her team have been really helpful in connecting us with the right people. And then going further than that, with Pacific Corporation having a wide and vast network through the Pacific, it's really helped us to connect and then to find the right people to essentially run these programs for us. And it's it's been great to see it. It's just a joy. Like, it's different to seeing kids in, I guess, Aotearoa or in America, learning this stuff. It's cool, but then when you see kids that maybe haven't interacted with a computer or not that much, to see that and to see the smiles on their face and to see them just pick it up just like that, it's been really fantastic. And I feel like I'm playing a small part in bridging that digital divide. So that's that's a little bit about what we've been able to do and build in-country capabilities, provide resources, training opportunities for teachers, and then as well access to our wonderful platform for our rangatahi. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me, Jackie. Thank you.
Lava Ray, thank you so much for sharing a bit about your background and the amazing work that you do at Code Avengers. In particular, an area I know of interest, especially since COVID hit, has been addressing the digital divide across the Pacific region, especially with our borders closed, and even more so how important it is to improve digital education for our Pacific kids in the Pacific region. So, I would now like to move on to our next panelist. Her name is none other than Pulotu Peta. She is the Vice Chair of the New Zealand Samoa Trade and Investment Commission. Pulotu is the founder and producer and festival director of the Samoana Jazz and Arts Festival in Samoa and American Samoa, which is a nonprofit NGO. She also owns an architectural design and consultancy firm in American Samoa. Her extensive work experience spans the public, private, and NGO community sectors in New Zealand, Samoa, and American Samoa. She first worked in the international NGO and aid development sectors in youth, women, rural development, education, and public infrastructure. She has also worked in New Zealand central government in social sectors. Pulotu worked in local governments in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, in economic development strategy and policy formulation in the Māori economy, Pacifica, and new migrants business development support. She also has a long history of activism and advocacy in the social justice realm, institutional racism, gender equity, and child poverty elimination. I would like to now welcome Pulotu Peta Siulepa.
Kia ora tātou katoa, tarofa lava, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to share our collaborators from around the Pacific, acknowledging also the Prime Minister's speeches and the topics, the pertinent topics that were raised in their presentations. I'd like to really focus my presentation to talk about development and to start from the place where, for myself, as a first-generation New Zealand-born Samoan, my parents migrated from Samoa in the late 1950s. And I realized very, very early that in order to navigate my way in this place, in Aotearoa, that I needed to really understand how to navigate my way in a Palangi world, how to navigate my way in the context of being tauiwi, with tangata whenua, in other words, as tangata moana, and then my place with my own people, my extended family of my father's people, my extended family of my mother's people, my village, my country, and I had the wonderful opportunity to be able to, at various times, serve in the country. So what I want to say is we are of the land, we are of the ocean, and we are of the skies. Our time has now come to rise. Climate change and COVID has made this even more imperative. So what does that actually mean? And what it means is responsible action is imperative. The space that I'm currently involved in is trade and investment between Aotearoa, New Zealand and Samoa. And for us, the notions of co-investment, partnering, it puts a responsibility on the aid donor countries and the agencies to understand better their own roles in relation to us. And what does that actually mean? I commend the aid work that has gone on in our region, and I commend the organisers of this conference, many non-profit organisations and many church agencies. What I have experienced over time is that they are doing to us, for us. And what we would like to say is that that time is over. The Cook Island Prime Minister really hit home that fact, that we need to redefine what our new relationships are about. What I'm seeing in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is that Māori are still an afterthought in many respects. Pacifica people are still an afterthought in many respects. So when projects are delivered in our various countries, these organisations go with not necessarily an understanding of who we actually are. The diaspora has a huge role to play in that space. Why? Because we have cultural capital. Why? Because we are linked to our countries through our ainga connections, through our villages, and through who we are. And I guess my challenge really is to the partner agencies, the aid donors, is to start to look at themselves in relation to us. And in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the best starting point is with tangata whenua, with mana whenua, with iwi. Over time too, I have seen a shift in the region where, because we've had other people speaking on our behalves, we have started to caucus amongst ourselves because we speak the same language. We are of the land, we are of the ocean, we are of the skies, and our livelihoods are being threatened right now. And it's not rocket science that the biggest emitters are not us. So the challenge is on. And can I also say that there are some wonderful, wonderful Indigenous organisations that are in existence, and a good starting place to build quality relationships with our people, to be able to help and work with aid donors, development organisations, Palangi organisations, to be able to navigate in a way that benefits not only us, but it also benefits them. So I think that's really the message that I wanted to share in terms of how do we actually invest together, how do we partner together. And I've heard, we've had some recent discussions with our own organisations, the private sector, for example, in Samoa, and we have been told that organisations from different countries who are non-Samoan come across and they don't get it. And what don't they get? They don't actually, or not, they haven't taken the time to actually understand who we are and how best to make the development contribution a meaningful one for them and a meaningful one for us. And I'll just leave it at there. Thank you very much, Afamasaga.
Pulotu, thank you so much for sharing and really acknowledge all your experience in this space, especially given that so much of your time has transcended across Aotearoa and the two Samoas. So whapitae tele lava. I would now like to introduce our third panelist. His name is Don Awe. He is an Associate Director of PwC New Zealand. Don Awe is from the island of Niue. Don's matua tane is Don Tevi Awe from the village of Hakupu, and his matua fifine is Melepepe Makapatama from the village of Baea. Don is the youngest of 6 siblings and married with 3 children. He has an accounting and business background, having worked in New Zealand, Australia, and Malaysia. Don is keen to see a thriving Pacific region and interested in using his own skills and background to ensure the Pacific region and the individual countries within it work towards sustainability and recovery in the post-COVID world. Pakalofa atu, Don, and welcome.
Jackie. Kia ora na katoa to the wonderful people from the Pearl of Polynesia. Maloi lele to the beautiful people of the kingdom. Talawhalawa, Pulotu, from the the home of the world's freshest water. Maloa ni, pakalawai atu, and warm Pacific greetings. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'll just add a little bit more in terms of what Jackie has said. So again, so haku ingoa katoa no e hau e motuku niue maanga kupu mo vaia. I'll just maybe speak to my tupuna. So if I have matua tāne aku, so on my dad's side, my tupuna, my grandfather and grandmother is Ahetoa and Lukiwha Awe. From my mum's side, Makapa and Wailima. And yes, that is correct. Her name is very similar to the bear in Samoa, which I always laughed at. But to me, they will always be Nana and Papa. So from, again, just a little bit about my background. So I've got a business and accounting experience, probably over 16 or 17 years. But obviously, as we grow older and wiser in our years, we tend to merge everything. And I guess I'd like to say I'm pretty experienced, particularly in a corporate background. I've worked in here in New Zealand. I returned back from New Zealand from my overseas experience in 2014. And overseas, I worked over in Australia and Malaysia. In Australia, I worked predominantly with companies that were listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, and not only helping with audits, but also in the back end of my career in Australia, helping with listings or IPOs of Australian companies, particularly based in or sectors around mineral resources and oil and gas. One of those actually took out the IPO of the Year award in 2013, I think. So it was quite awesome to be a part of. And I've also worked in Malaysia, who my wife hail from. So like many Pacific people in New Zealand, we have, I guess, I've married outside of the Niuean culture, partly because obviously there's a fear that we all say we're related, and I didn't want to go down that avenue. So anyway, and I now am. So my interests at the moment is I do a lot of work with at PwC New Zealand, working in management consulting, working specifically in the PwC Hauora team. And where our theme is, or our ethos is, reimagining health and well-being for all Kiwis. So, and the other thing I've got a strong passion about is investment, particularly around working with emerging companies, organizations that are in emerging technology. So one of those being a biopharmaceutical company, where I am a director in Australia of Good Nutraceuticals, and I sit on the board of the Malaysian parent as a corporate and financial consultant. So the thing for today is around reimagining Pacific Diaspora and Pacific regional organizations and their roles in Pacific development in a post-COVID world. And two things I wanted to concentrate on is why should we do things differently? And the other being, what can we do differently? So why should we be doing things differently? I think, as the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands mentioned, COVID has had a significant impact on not only the Pacific region, but the world as a whole. But we also know as Pacific people that COVID pales in significance to some of the other pandemics that we as Pacific people have continued to live through. In New Zealand, it is things like chronic disease. In the Pacific, we've had generations of depopulation. The other point I'd like to say is, depopulation and global warming. The other point is, it is a turning point for change in the course of Pacific people. And I say this from two perspectives. One, Pacific people, we're young. We're typically, in comparison to other populations, we're a young population. And what we are now seeing is we're seeing a new wave of Pacific people who are young and may not have been brought up in the Pacific, but still have strong cultural ties and are wanting to go back. I count myself as one of those. I've got a history in corporate, and I've looked after quite significant transactions and companies. Now I want to use that skill for another purpose. Then the other thing is we're introducing totally different ways of thinking, and that's a function of technology and all the other things we are seeing. The other thing is, what can we do differently? I'll just make one point before I move on, or a couple of points. People, again, this panel is a great example of the people we have, the different skills, expertise, and which is, I feel, significantly greater than it was maybe 20, 30 years ago. The other thing that I think we need to do differently is we need to change the mindset from fixing a problem to creating an opportunity. And specifically for this forum, introduce the concepts of ownership and partnership, which I think need to be at the forefront of any decisions made by any development or aid help geared towards Pacific. Ilolahia, back to you, Jackie.
Don, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And yes, we acknowledge you've had so much time and experience in the corporate sector. And I really acknowledge as well that most of us as Pacific are professionals, although we might venture out into all parts of the world and all parts of corporate life, somehow we all get a calling to come back to serve our people, not just here in Aotearoa, but also in the region. And so I really acknowledge you that you have done just that in your new role at PwC. Now, I would like to introduce our final panelist for today. Her name is Emeline Siale Ilolahia. She is the Executive Director of PIANGO, which is the Pacific Island NGO organization. Siale is Tongan. She is based in Suva, Fiji. She was a former civil servant before her career in civil society as the Executive Director of the Civil Society Forum of Tonga for 10 plus years before moving to Fiji to take up her new role as Executive Director of PIANGO. She represents the interests of Pacific civil society in a range of regional and international fora. She is passionate about localization and had worked in partnership with development actors to explore an alternative local system that enforces accountability to local population while showcasing the capabilities of our Pacific people. I would like to now hand over the time to none other than a very well-known Emeline Siale. Malo people.
Malo elele, kole peke hufanga e ngā whakatapu kotoa pe whawhaki, kai ataka te au ke ukau te talanoa oi hoani. Kula winaka from Suva, greetings from the Pacific. I would like to, I think my former speakers have really shared what I understand the technical capacity of our diaspora community, if I could summarize it as that. But to bring the conversation into the development space, we have seen what COVID-19 has exposed, the model of economic development that we had been adopted by our national government in our countries, that it has brought out to light how we had the gaps between the priorities that are set to drive development in our countries from an economic development perspective, and where the gaps has been in terms of social protections, for example, health, example, education. So it brings to light that there has been a priority that has been shifted. In the past years, I had been part of a organization that was supported by New Zealand Aid at the time, where they put a lot of investment into civil society as development actors in our own right. And that has been shifted over the years because of the priorities that has been defined by New Zealand and the aid donor communities that has shifted to supporting economic development. And so that has been disrupted wholly by COVID-19. And what has come to light that when we are talking about alternative development paradigm or alternative development model, we then realize when it comes to COVID-19 that it was not really an alternative. It was really our traditional and our cultural system that has been able to hold us this far, because our tourism industry has been disrupted. People were out of jobs. The whole primary system that has supported our development in our countries had been disrupted. And we see the role of the traditional, role of our culture, role of our indigenous understanding and knowledge in agriculture, in food security. That's where the resilience of our people, that's where that has been kept us going up to now. Yeah? And so this is where that we need to really look into the priorities and who is really defining those priorities that given the drive for our donors and our aid to support our development in our countries. In terms of localization, so we had been working with a partner humanitarian advisory group in Australia, because we recognize what research does. You know how if there is any new projects that the donor wanted to support, what they do, they send a whole lot of consultants with a predetermined agenda to look for things that they want to see. Yeah. So we need to take this back. We need to do our own research. We need to define our own priorities, and that's what we have done. We changed our narrative and we said, okay, if we talk localization, we have 7 key areas that we want to donors to come, or even international NGOs to come in and look at it from our lens. Yeah. One is partnership. One is leadership. We talk about capacity. We talk about the coordination and complementarity. We talk about funding, and we talk about policy influence and advocacy, and we talk about participation. So these are the key areas that we say, talk about localization, this is it. We want to define together what does this mean in terms of working around localization. The leverage role of aid in influencing our development need to be shifted. It needs to shift and to be guided by local priorities that are not just defined by government, it's defined also by civil society and the majority of our population through a good consultation process. The other one that I would like to also bring to this conversation is the role of civil society. And I would also like to bring in the role of the diaspora community. And you know, in the questions, Jackie, when you're saying, has diaspora community been part of the development? Yes, definitely. And that has come through with when we see the COVID-19, where government was trying to figure out where they get their money from. Our diaspora community has reached out to their families, has reached out to their villages, to their communities in so many different ways. What we want from our regional perspective for our diaspora community, you need to step up as well. You need to be part and parcel of looking into the geopolitics of our region, for example. You need to look into, when you're talking about debt in our government system, this has not been just brought in by COVID. It was even there before. More than half of our countries in the Pacific has about 40 to 60% of their budget are actually budget support from donors. That is not a good sign. Yeah, but how do we see that? How do we see the capacity of our diaspora bring into that expertise to start talking about those things in our own local language, because you have that access to the New Zealand. I will finish off, Cheki, by just saying there's a lot of space in our regional space that we can bring the diaspora community to be part of the conversations around safeguarding our natural resources, our oceans, for the future of our generations and the resilience of our Pacific. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Aloha pito, Emeline, Siale. Aloha pito for all of your experience and your passion that's coming through to us all the way there from Fiji in terms of your work working with civil society in the Pacific region. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts around our consultation. That was a very important point, I think, because a lot of times when development partners reach out to understand the priorities of a country, it's sometimes limited just to government input, but also very important that the input of the civil society who know what the needs are on the ground is also taken into account. I also acknowledge your challenge to our Pacific diaspora to step up and be more involved in Pacific regional development and politics, as you have mentioned, so that they understand the environment that those of our Pacific people on the ground that choose to stay in our island nations are working with. So maloa pito, Siale, thank you so much. We really acknowledge and thank you for everything that you've shared with us today. Now, thank you so much to all our panelists. We are about to wrap it up for this morning, as we are just about to go to a break. So I would like to acknowledge all the thoughts and all of the issues raised by our panelists. So whawetaitele lava lawa fionga Ray, whapena foi lawa fionga Pulotu, whapena foi lawa fionga Don, malawa fionga Emeline, Siale. Whawhetai lava mo manatu wa lawa, that you have all of you, everything that you have shared. Whawhetai lava mo manatu lawa. I thank you so much for everyone for tuning in to hear the thoughts of our Pacific diaspora and our Pacific regional organization representative. And we wish you well for the rest of the SID conference.
Michael,
yeah.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Thank you, panel. If you want to all go.
We'll see you guys on the conference platform. Okay.
Wow. Hey, thank you. Awesome.
Yes.
I hope to stay in touch with the panelists. You guys were awesome.
Oh, you guys rocks. Fantastic, guys.
Have you got the